best podcast, the Heidelminicast.
It's a Heidelminicast. And now, Scott Clark.
We've got a lot of email.
Well, let's read some emails, shall we?
We will do that. We've got a message from Mike about why people don't understand figures of speech. An email from Matthew. And he's wondering if we can discuss the difference between Reformed theology and Calvinism, and something from Robert about his frustration with people appealing to Genesis 12 and applying it directly to the modern state of Israel.
If the Heidelcast helps you, won't you help us keep it going? Please make the coffer clean by clicking on the PayPal link or by sending a check to Heidelberg Reformation Association, 1637 East Island Parkway, number 391, Escondido, California, 92027.
The best podcast, the Heidelminicast.
You got some letters?
We've got 3 of them, in fact, as I've already mentioned. By the way, as I'm getting these paperwork figured out here, don't forget to subscribe to the Heidelcast. You can do that in any podcast app, and if you like the Heidelcast, you'll love the Heidel blog. There's more audio there. Do you know there's a whole library of audio and video stuff? Just go to heidelblog.net/media. heidelblog.net/media, and you'll find those resources, and then there's just a ton of stuff. And did you know there's we're nearing 800 episodes of the Heidelcast. So I think that's right. I think it's pretty close. We're heading towards 800 episodes. So if you subscribe, you should get most of those. And if you don't, for whatever reason, you can find them at heidelblog.net/Heidelcast. All right, so let's deal with the one from Robert, because I think I just touched on this recently, so I won't be very long on this. But he says, Dear Dr. Clark, I love the Jewish people, but I'm growing weary of contemporary evangelicals using Genesis 12, 1 through 3, to communicate that by someone blessing the modern state of Israel or poor Holocaust survivors, God is indebted to bless you. I don't believe this is true. Well, you would be correct, Robert. It is not true. So you're right. And Paul gives us great commentary on the promises made to Abraham in Galatians and Romans, particularly Galatians 3:15 through 29. I think that's exactly right as well. Well done. I don't want to sound cold or unloving, but I'm asking you to help me and others know how to appropriately respond to this error that may one day become a kind of litmus test for Christians. Thank you, and we need more cowbell, please. You've gotten quite a bit of cowbell already. I hope that helps. I hope that satisfies your need for cowbell. I mean, who doesn't need cowbell? So you're exactly right about this. I mean, honestly, I don't think I have much more to add to what you've said. I think you've explained the problem very well. We have to interpret the Old Testament through the New Testament. We have to let the New Testament not only teach us how to interpret particular passages, but how to interpret the Hebrew Bible generally, the whole Old Testament, all the types and shadows. So I'm using Old Testament deliberately so that we don't just think of Moses, right, which is the Old Covenant, strictly speaking, according to the New Testament, but the whole history of redemption before the incarnation is what I'm talking about. So, I mean, Robert's exactly right. The Bible doesn't know anything about a modern state of Israel, and it's just a huge supposition, a huge assumption to read back the formation, and I think it is a wonderful thing. I'm not opposed to it at all, but as I said last time, the modern state of Israel is not a fulfillment of prophecy. It is a modern political development that comes out of the Holocaust and the horrors thereof, and the necessity of solving what came to be known in the 19th and 20th centuries as the Jewish problem. And of course, we're very acutely aware of that now. You see people demanding stupidly the death of Jews without even realizing it. I just saw an interview the other day. I thought it must be a put on, but I don't think it was. An interviewer was talking to college students who'd been, chanting things like from the river to the sea, and he asked them what river, what sea. They had no idea. It was just I'm sorry. I mean, it was really, it was just unbelievably dumb.
Is everybody dumb?
No, just the people demanding the death of Jews on college campuses, and they didn't even know what they were saying. This is a Palestinian slogan from the river to the sea, meaning they want to wipe out national Israel. They want to wipe out Jews. They think that the Holocaust was a good thing, and people are stupidly repeating it. And I'm using that adverb intentionally. I mean thoughtless. I mean ignorant. That's what I mean. And these are the young people who are going to take over companies and things. So that's somewhat discouraging. And they're being encouraged to do this by their professors. By the way, Mom and Dad, you ought to pay attention to where you spend your tuition dollars. If this is what is being done at places like UCLA, and I spent a lot of tuition money at UCLA for one of my kids, so it's very discouraging to see professors out there promoting this nonsense. And lots of Ivy League schools, places where people should know better, you'd think, the way that they talk, the way they market themselves. There are very few colleges, I think, that are worthy in 2024 of your tuition dollars. So you need to look into that. What does it profit a family if you spend $200,000 or $300,000 or whatever it is now on a kid, and they come out and they don't know that when they're chanting from the river to the sea that they're calling for the death of Jews? That seems like the whole educational process has failed at that point. But at any rate, Genesis 12 is talking about, according to the New Testament, according to Hebrews, it's talking about the ingathering of the Gentiles. And so this has nothing to do with the modern state of Israel. And to read the modern state of Israel back into the Bible is a terrible kind of anachronism. It's a terrible way to read a text. And Robert's exactly right. We want to read Genesis 12 in light of Galatians 3, 15 through 29, in light of really all of Romans. And all Israel will be saved. And you can't just assume that Israel there means ethnic Jews, because it probably doesn't. Listen to the series on Romans that we did, the whole Heidelminicast series. We did dozens of episodes going through Romans.
The best podcast, the Heidelminicast.
Well, let's read some emails, shall we?
All right, and then we'll do another one here. This one is from Mike Stevens. Did you like that rant? You got quite a rant in the first segment. It says, Scott, God bless you, brother. Well, thank you. My son and I enjoy your podcast so much. Well, that's great that Dad, and that is a fine dad and son activity, listening to the Heidelcast. So, greetings, son of Mike. And it says, it's such a breath of fresh air, transition from Calvinistic MacArthurist from 1994 to 1997. Now attend PCA Church. Pastors attended Covenant and so forth. And it says, my question has to do with confronting, admonishing, challenging born-again Christians that read the Bible literally, or literalist, he says. That's his word. I am so concerned that Americans can't read English. So many do not understand figurative writing, simile, allegory, etc. And to top it off, these brothers and sisters are so inconsistent they seem blind to reading New Testament / Old Testament literature, history, apocalyptic writing. And he mentions Romans 3, depravity, Ephesians 2, Revelation, symbolic numbers. And he says, I'm just a kid from Oklahoma. Well, I'm just a kid from Nebraska, who spent a little bit of time in Oklahoma. But my early Bible teachers and pastors could read English. And then he asks, are they blinded by the devil? I really want to play a clip from Bob Dylan. Blinded by the devil. Anyway, well, I'm going to resist that temptation. It almost seems that way, and I'm not even sure what that might mean. Help! Well, I get your frustration, Mike. Mike and Mike. It says two Mikes, so maybe son is also Mike. Mike. I think that's what is it? It's a military expression. Yeah, I know. Somebody will explain it in the comments on the Heidelblog at heidelblog.net. You idiot, it means this. But I know it. It's a radio expression in the military. I just, at the moment, can't remember exactly what it means, Mike. At any rate, how do you fix a widespread educational failure? That's the question we're facing. So it's not just reading the Bible, it's just reading literature. So, I think that's the fundamental thing, is that we might have to have Christians, not the church, the institutional church, but Christians might have to set up educational centers, I guess we could call those schools, where we could teach people how to read literature. I used to joke with my students about a coming dark ages, which I didn't really think was coming real soon, but I had the sense that we weren't all that far away from it. And boy, it has come upon us a lot more quickly than I expected. I see it, in my work as a teacher, that people are not being well prepared. I spend a lot of time now with very bright, ostensibly well-educated students, talking to them about how to write a term paper. And when I came to school, it was expected that I would know how to do it. I actually didn't know very well how to write a term paper. I did all right, but I could have done better work had I been better educated. I remember asking, and I won't say her name, but a composition English teacher in high school, would you please explain to me how to use commas? And she looked at me like I was crazy. Like, who doesn't know how to use commas? Well, I honestly didn't. And I finally had to teach myself. And even then, some people think I don't know quite what I'm doing, but I know more than I did. And there's some debate about how to use commas, but at any rate, there are different genres of literature, as we were just talking about in a previous episode, in the Bible, and we need to learn to recognize those, learn to recognize figurative language when it exists, and to distinguish that from, literal language. That's just a skill. It's an art. And I think people are victimized, by their education.
I'm a victim of circumstance.
Well, they certainly are, Curly. So that's, I do think it's a very serious problem.
Truth is stranger than fiction.
It really is.
You've got some letters.
All right, one more.
The Heidelcast.
And this is from Matthew, and he says, I'm not sure if you remember me, but we used to follow each other on Twitter in 2022 before I got off social media. Well, hello, Matthew. And he says, I'm continuing to grow in my faith, primarily by learning to rest in God's grace and justification, by faith alone. That gets a cowbell. And by learning the particulars of Reformed theology. With that said, I'm wondering if you can explain to me the difference between Reformed theology and Calvinism, if there is one. Thanks so much, and I hope you are well. Well, I'm much better than I was, so thank you, Matthew. I appreciate that. There's a couple of ways we can distinguish Reformed theology and Calvinism. So historically, not the way people use the adjective or the noun Calvinism now. The way they use it now, they mean anybody who believes in predestination. That Calvinism has become synonymous with predestination, and that's a very sort of modern way of speaking. But it was the Lutherans who invented Calvinism as an epithet, or Calvinist as an epithet. Originally, we just called ourselves Reformed. And then they gave us the epithet Calvinist. So in their mind, I think there was some considerable overlap. But as a matter of history, there's always been some distinction. So Reformed, I explain in class, is a broader term than Calvinist. So there were Reformed people in Strasbourg who weren't necessarily Calvinist exactly in every particular. Not to say they disagreed on soteriology. By the way, so let's get this out of the way. For the most part, through the 16th and 17th centuries, the Reformed churches, wherever they were found, in the British Isles, in Zurich, Strasbourg, Heidelberg, Geneva, so forth. So wherever you want to look, the Netherlands, they all taught essentially the same doctrine of salvation. So we shouldn't think there's any big difference. I think there's some development in Zurich. And so I notice a considerable difference between the way, for example, Zwingli speaks in the 1520s and up to his death in 31, and then some maturity in Bullinger in the succeeding decades, which covers a lot of territory since he died in 1575. So there's 40 years of development. And then we published in the Classic Reformed Theology series a little handbook on theology by J.H. Heidegger in the late 17th century. And you look at that thing, and you can't wedge a dime between, say, Geneva in the 1670s and Zurich in the 1690s. It's virtually identical stuff. So there is real development, I think, in Zurich Zurich. But otherwise, I think there's a lot of overlap, and so there they're all Reformed. But there are ways in which you can talk about Calvinism or Calvinist theology as, if we're going to orient that specifically to Calvin and not just using it sort of unthinkingly to refer to predestination, as if Calvin alone taught predestination. Again, this is an ancient doctrine that goes back to the early fathers. I've documented that on the Heidel blog, much to the chagrin of some people, but facts are facts, and it's certainly a doctrine taught unequivocally by Augustine and the Augustinians after him, his followers, and then the Neo-Augustinians and so forth. Aquinas unapologetically teaches a very high doctrine of unconditional election and eternal reprobation, and he doesn't think it's controversial at all to say those things. So, those doctrines are not uniquely Calvinistic, or they're not unique to Calvin. There are some things I think that are distinct to Calvin. He has an emphasis on polity that you don't find everywhere else. He has a particular polity. He's Presbyterial in his polity. He has 4 offices. That's a little bit distinct. He has a high view of the Lord's Supper that isn't shared everywhere. It's shared in Heidelberg, I think. But I don't know that it's necessarily shared to the same degree or in the same way in Zurich. I think it probably was in Strasbourg, but I don't think it was necessarily everywhere in the Netherlands, although Guy de Brès, who studied in Geneva, certainly did embrace it, because there's a very high view of the Lord's Supper in the Belgic Confession. There are these distinctives. Covenant theology develops in Geneva, but it actually could be said to be more highly developed elsewhere, and I think that's accurate. So even as Calvin is getting old, sick, and dying, in that same period in Heidelberg, Ursinus and Olivianus are working out a covenant theology that's probably a little more detailed, a little more explicit, and a little more advanced in some ways than Calvin. So Reformed is a broader term, a more comprehensive term, strictly speaking, and Calvinist, historically, strictly speaking, is a more narrow term, reflecting on some emphases and distinctives that we can associate with Calvin. Now, the way that people use it now, it's just not very helpful the way people speak. Well, people, some evangelical, some Baptist guy who becomes a, predestinarian, and he announces on social media, "I'm a Calvinist." Well, I pushed back on that. I said, "Really? Do you agree with Calvin on this, and this?" No. What? So, what he means is I'm predestinarian because this is the way we've come to speak. It's an unhappy development. So it is the case, just to answer that aspect of the question, that all Reformed people are predestinarian, but obviously not all predestinarians are Reformed. So I would rather speak in historical categories and to use the term in a way that makes some sense. If you reject Calvin's view of the sacraments, you reject Calvin's view of the church, you reject Calvin's reading of redemptive history, and you only agree with him on predestination and election, I can't see how exactly you are Calvinist. You're Augustinian, maybe, predestinarian, but you're not in any meaningful sense of the word Calvinist.
Thanks for listening. Tune in tomorrow for more from the Heidelcast, brought to you by Heidelberg Reformation Association.org. Don't forget, when the coin in the coffer clinks, the cost of bandwidth shrinks. Copyright Heidelberg Reformation Association. All rights reserved. This is a Heidel Media production.
The best podcast, the Heidelcast.